In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, hello everyone, and welcome to the new episode of the Fact series in which we discuss international political matters every week. This is Foad Mahdavi, and in this episode, I have the honor of being the host of Michael Springmann, an American activist and political analyst. We are here to discuss the deal of century and the annexation of the West Bank to Israel. Thank you for joining us, Michael, and good to be with you.
Well, I'm happy to have the invitation to appear and talk to your listeners.
Thank you very much. I would like to have your words about two main questions. What is the nature of deal of the century, and why was this deal published at this time? Has the failure of Zionists to form a cabinet and two election periods played a role in this case?
Well, the deal of the century is essentially the ripoff of the century. It is done for the benefit of the apartheid entity of Israel and at the expense of the Palestinian people who have had their entire land taken away from them. It's most likely good for Israel in that it helps Netanyahu, or should have helped Netanyahu, be reelected as the apartheid entity's prime minister, and was to have been good for Donald Trump and his reelection campaign for the fall of this year. However, it's a flop from what I can see. The Palestinians are not about to touch it with a 10-foot pole or a 12-foot Hungarian. Additionally, they simply have denounced the plan to essentially take away what's left of Palestine and give it to the Israelis and their colonies in the West Bank. They will put all kinds of conditions upon the Palestinians for the little bit of sovereignty they would be allowed, and they would have to prove to the Israeli satisfaction and the American satisfaction as to their good behavior, if you want to call it that. It's not measured, it's not written down. There, in fact, a lot of great vaguenesses to the plan and its policies. So it's a non-starter, and no Palestinian in his right mind would accept any part of this.
In my perspective, the Americans believe that they can carry out any sort of project and conspiracy in the region with the help of Israelis. And the outline of the deal of the century is one of those strategic mistakes, I think. How do you assess this process? Do you think so?
Well, it's the Americans' support of Israel that enables the Israelis to engage in murder, war crimes, and human rights violations, not only in Palestine, but in the neighboring region. And if the United States did not give the Israelis $10 million a day, plus cut rate deals on military weapons, plus permitting the Israelis to sell American military technology for their own account and their own profit, Israel would blow away and disappear.
If you want to explain more, in order to expand your words, I'd like to get something more about these aspects of this question.
The American support.
If you like, if not, we can jump to another question.
Okay, no, the Israelis have excellent connections in the United States. There is a book out on the American-Israeli connection written by a husband and wife journalist team. And in the book, they go very, very deep into detail about what the Israelis do for the Americans that the Americans can't do for themselves. And they're seen, therefore, as being very, very valuable group of people. For example, they can go into Latin America and blend in with the population better than the white bread Americans from Kansas. They can engage in drug deals, gun running, and things like this. They helped a lot with Iran-Contra in Latin America. They are excellent at spying in the Middle East. Americans can barely speak English, and they certainly can't speak much of Arabic. And the Israelis can, and they can blend into the local population because they fit in a lot better than someone from Kansas. Additionally, they have... besides providing information, they've engaged in assassinations on behalf of the Americans, and it's plausible deniability for the United States. The Israelis have gotten great control over state and local governments in the United States, especially regarding BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. They have gotten the Maryland governor to issue an executive order condemning this and refusing Maryland state government contracts to any company that participates in BDS. In Virginia, for example, next to Washington, D.C., as is Maryland, they have gotten deeply into the Virginia government, setting up non-functioning companies, employing Israelis and taking jobs away from Americans, and essentially shipping state government support money to Israel and doing nothing in return. The same goes for New Jersey. They're very deeply involved there. Something like 26 or 27 American states out of 50 have laws or executive orders against boycott, divestment, and sanction. And they have passed these things on the basis of Israel is a great ally, Israel is a great democracy, et cetera, totally out of touch with reality, totally out of touch with democracy and what it really means. And I think that additionally, the Israelis turn about and say any criticism of our policies in the United States, our request for American help in the region or anywhere else in the world, anybody who opposes this is anti-Semitic. For example, I attended in Mashhad, Iran, just about 2 years ago now, a conference, the New Horizon Conference, that supposedly was on Palestine, but covered a wide range of subjects. And everyone involved with the New Horizon Conference was sanctioned by the American Treasury Department, run by Mnuchin. And the head of the Office of Foreign Assets Control, the Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, this woman who was born in Israel, grew up in Israel, and somehow came to the United States, this Sigal Perel-Mandelker, to the best of my knowledge, information, and belief, is still an Israeli citizen, because I've tried to get the Israeli embassy and the Israeli foreign ministry to confirm or deny that she was still an Israeli citizen. She's sanctioned all of these people and threatened sanctions against any American who went to a second conference that the New Horizon organization set up in Beirut last year, and sent FBI agents to warn these people who had been invited that they were not about to go, or they would be jailed and fined substantial amounts of money. So the Israelis have complete control of the American government and state government,
Great
governments.
Exactly. How do you analyze the political dimension and goals of the deal of the century? As you know, the U.S. government is responsible for the foreign policy of this deal, while its political behavior is ambiguous. What do you think?
Well, the whole operation is not clear. It's hundreds of pages of text. There are very vague references to Israeli borders, which are as yet undefined, and I think the Israelis seem to think that they want Greater Israel to stretch from the Nile River to the Tigris or the Euphrates, the Dijla or the Furat, as the Iraqis call them. I think that they're doing their best to strip away whatever little bits of Palestine that are supposedly independent in these areas A, B, and C, reduce their control. The Israeli government will keep external control, and in many instances, and especially in B and C, they will have internal controls of the areas in Palestine, or what's left of Palestine. And the Americans supposedly promised that they will get great benefits, they will get money, they will get jobs, they will get housing, they will get businesses, etc. But it's all very, very vague. It's all very, very pro-Israel. The Palestinians are supposed to give up the right of return for the 6 or 7 million Palestinians who are now in exile all around the world. And they are expected to blend into the countries in which they've taken refuge after being driven out of Israel in 1948 at gunpoint. So I think that there's nothing good at all in the deal of the century. And I think there's everything bad about it. And it certainly benefits Israel. They expand their settlements, or if they call them settlements, they're more like colonies on the West Bank, which is mostly Area C. And they will simply give up any rights that they have now and permit the Israeli Defense Force, if you can call it that, to roam unrestricted through the areas A, B, and C, making sure that the Palestinians, quote unquote, behave themselves. So it's absolute nonsense, and nobody in their right mind should accept it.
How do you see the viewpoint of international communities about the deal, and what could be the reaction also?
Well, the international communities, it's mixed. I've seen just this morning, I think on RT, that in Norway, something like 60 governmental and non-governmental organizations have condemned Israeli treatment of Palestine. Yet at the same time, I saw a note saying that the Austrian province of Styria has condemned boycott, divestment, and sanction. So it's a mixed bag. You get talk and statements from some governments and from some organizations. Yet, in actual fact, when something concrete needs to be done, like blocking Israeli exports of Palestinian goods that are, or rather Israeli goods that are made with Palestinian labor, Palestinian water, Palestinian energy resources, such that they are, they won't reject them. They allow the Israelis to derive the benefits from that. I think additionally, the United Nations could do more, but all the United Nations does is talk. There was an article I saw probably on RT again this morning that talked about Australia was opposed to Palestine's bringing of actions against Israel in the International Criminal Court. Australia claimed that Palestine, like the Israelis say, is not a state. Yet Palestine existed far longer than Israel has existed. And in fact, I was talking to my Arabic teacher this morning who mentioned his grandmother is older than Israel. So, and she is still alive. So I think that this idea that Israel somehow has existed for millennia is absolute nonsense. And the foreign countries around the world should recognize this. They should recognize what's been done to Palestine and how, with the Americans and British aid, Palestine was dissolved by Zionist invasions in the 1940s. So it's it's a mixed bag. Some countries talk about what's going on in Palestine and what the Israelis are doing, but no one takes any action. That would probably engender complaints and annoyances and screams of anti-Semitism from the apartheid government of Israel. And in fact, the Israelis have in fact put a woman on Facebook's board of directors for governing content on what is offensive and not offensive on Facebook postings brought about by Mark Zuckerberg, who is a Jew and a Zionist and a supporter of Angela Merkel's migrant policy in Germany. So we can see what's going to happen in the future. You will not post anything bad about Israel or anything about what the Zionists have done on Facebook, or you will be sanctioned and put in Facebook jail for weeks and days or forever. So I think that we need to make some basic changes all around the world and very, very quickly.
I see. And how do you see the future of this project? Is this agreement doomed to failure from your point of view?
I think it is. It's not any good unless the Palestinians accept it. And the Palestinians have not. Granted that their government, the Palestinian Authority, is a group of people far out of touch with the Palestinian people. My Arabic teacher, who's a Palestinian, is very, very critical of these people. And Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, he's not run for re-election. He just simply took his seat and kept his seat after he was elected years ago, once they had blocked Hamas from participating in any kind of elections in Palestine. So by and large, the Palestinian Authority is illegitimate and working essentially against the Palestinian people. But even this acceptance of the deal of the century is something that even the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas will not go for, that they cannot be persuaded to go for. That is entirely a step far too far for any legitimate Palestinian government or people who claim to be a legitimate Palestinian government to take any action.
This kind of deals is a kind of right violations. Ending such human rights violations must mean ending the Zionist regime and replacing it with guarantees of full equal civil and political rights for everyone in historic Palestine. How could we reach this point? Do you agree with me first, and then how could we reach this point?
Oh, I most certainly agree with you. And I think one example of doing this is South Africa. It was denounced as an apartheid entity, and the world united against South Africa. The United States, which had supported it, and sanctioned their, I'm sorry, sanctioned in the sense of approving and cooperating with South Africa's cooperation with Israel in building atomic weapons. Uh, the Americans eventually withdrew their support and started putting up economic sanctions against the country. It starting to work against their political interests. The entire world united against South Africa, and eventually the apartheid government fell and was forced to share power with the black South Africans and the colored South Africans. The same thing can be done to Israel. That's the whole point of boycott, divestment, and sanction, which is strongly opposed by the United States, which is strongly opposed by part of Austria, the Styrian province. And well, look at the Australians. They think that Palestine is not a country, so it has no right to bring war crimes charges against the apartheid Israeli government. Turn off their water, figuratively. Stop giving them millions of dollars a day like the Americans do. $10 million a day, $3.8 billion a year. That's entirely too much money for a gang of murderers, war criminals, and human rights violators. I think that once you start saying that your passports are not valid for travel to Israel, and Israeli passports are not valid for travel to the United States or Austria or Australia or Germany or France or anywhere else in the world, and that the Israelis can't export goods, the Israelis can't buy weapons from the United States or be given weapons by the United States, then you're going to start to see the beginning of the end. But you need a united effort by the rest of the world to bring down this monstrous government that has far too much power. I don't even think there are 9 million Israelis in occupied Palestine. Yet they seem to control the entire world because they worm their way into the centers of power in the United States and other countries. Gilad Atzmon, the great musician and writer, who was a former Israeli, is highly critical of these people and lays out exactly what is wrong with them, why they have isolated themselves from the rest of the world and refuse to cooperate with the rest of the world or any country in which they are living. I think you should read his books, The Wandering Who, and the new book about being in time. He really analyzes the problems of Israel, Judaism, Zionism, and their attitudes and how they get these attitudes and what they do with these attitudes. So these people are really outcasts of the world. They huddle in a small part of the Middle East and dictate to the rest of the world, and this has got to stop.
Exactly. Dear Michael, somebody blames Palestinians for their own persecution by Israel and believes that Palestinians must abandon any form of resistance to Israel and appeal to a mythical Israeli center left that is yearning for peace and two-state solution. What do you think about it?
Well, I think it's nonsense. As my Arabic teacher noted, and I've seen in news reports, there is never any kind of discussion of what brings about Palestinian resistance. It's always the Palestinian stabs or shoots or punches this poor Israeli citizen who was doing nothing more than walking down the street. Yet they don't seem to look at what happened before that the Israelis have turned a good chunk of Gaza into an open-air prison where they get no supplies, and the entire operation is based on what they call mowing the grass, that they inflict enough punishment and pain and enough killing and enough injury to Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere in the occupied areas that it doesn't really amount to mass killings, but it results in mass suffering and mass misery. And the American press, in particular, as is done in Europe, also simply focuses on the actions of the Palestinians and not what the Israelis have done to provoke these actions. They're occupied people. Their country was taken away from them. And under international law, an occupied people has a right to resist by any means possible. Yet international law is not recognized by the people who support Israel. And this idea of a two-state solution is ludicrous from the very beginning, yet there are far too many people like Hussein Ibish, an honest-to-God Palestinian, at least half Palestinian, who supports this nonsense. The people seem to think that, yes, we can take all of Palestine away from the Palestinians, yet at the same time, we're going to give them part of their country back, and we will control that part of the country, and therefore we will have a two-state solution. The entire Palestinian people, what's left of them, can dwell in some small percentage of where they were living when they had 100% of their own country. So it's they don't seem to realize the reality of the situation, which is typical for many Americans and far too typical for many Europeans. Look at the last election in Britain, where the Zionists rose up against Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, and Corbyn and the Labour Party didn't fight back, and they were denounced as anti-Semitic and opposed to Israel, and they dared to support Palestine. And Corbyn and the Labour Party, who failed to resist this nonsense, were tossed out and replaced by a right-wing extremist government of Boris Johnson. The same thing happens in the United States. You've got Donald Trump supporting Israel, right, left, and center, saying that Al-Quds is the rightful capital of all Israel instead of the rightful capital of all Palestinians. He moved the American embassy there. He's supporting this deal of the century, and he's going to go. He went along with the Israelis making a de facto theft of the Golan Heights from Syria, annexing it formally. They're planning to do the same thing to the West Bank, and the Americans are going to support that. I see no opposition to that. And if you threw Donald Trump out of office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, you would still have the issue of the Democrats, so they've replaced them. It's one cheek of the great American behind. And the Democrats all support Israel. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, has criticized any member of the House of Representatives, the lower house here in Congress, of criticizing Israel. So I think there's going to be no change unless you get a major change in the United States and the attitude towards the apartheid entity.
Thank you very much. And for the last question, how close do you see the decline of Zionist regime?
Well, I like to think that the illegitimate and terrorist Christian Kingdom of Jerusalem lasted but 85 years. And since Israel isn't even 75 years old at the present time, I would hope they don't make it to the 85-year mark. But unless there are major changes, unless some Americans get dead very quickly and very explosively and get plastered across the front pages of the newspaper and take up a lot of time on the evening news, they're going to go on and on and on until they simply run out of people to oppress and exploit. And they wouldn't last a minute if the United States dropped them. I mean, Israel is America's oldest enemy and greatest debtor. They have made attacks on the United States from the very beginning, firebombing U.S. Information Service libraries in Egypt and an American consulate in Egypt. They've attacked the American intelligence ship Liberty, trying all day to sink it and killing some 30 members of the ship's company and wounding another 170. They've blinded Jews who protested their attack on the Mavi Marmora and the Palestinian Rescue Fleet. They've simply murdered Rachel Corrie, running over her twice with a bulldozer, but somehow this never seems to resonate with the United States people and the United States government. So until this changes, the apartheid entity and its illegitimate government of murderers, war criminals, and human rights violators will continue. And I'd like to see them disappear by the 85-year mark of their existence, but I am not optimistic that's going to happen. They have far too much support everywhere in the world because they are very good at manipulating people.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us again, dear Michael. If you want to add something more, I'm all ears.
Well, I think that's the best thing you can say is you got to start exposing the Israelis and their activities and their control of government in the United States and elsewhere. But unfortunately, the American press, the news media, call it the printed word, call it the radio and television, whatever you want to call it. The issue basically is that there are only 5 or 6 corporations that control most of the news in the United States. And of those, they are controlled by people who are Jews. And unfortunately, too many Jews are Zionists and they support Israel. So they're going to block any attempt to get real information out to the United States or the rest of the world about what the apartheid entity is up to, how it's damaged the United States and other countries, and how the Israeli support in the United States is damaging Iran, forcing the wreckage of their economy, forcing people to get sick without help from this coronavirus, which Philip Giraldi, the American former intelligence officer, has suggested might have come from American-Israeli cooperation. So, wherever you turn, the Israelis are out to harm Iran, to harm an Arab country, to harm a Muslim country, and to prevent themselves from being held to account. So until the International Criminal Court starts looking closely what the Israelis are doing, until the American government and the American press and the American people start looking at this, we're going to be afflicted with a gang of murderers, war criminals, and human rights violators masquerading as a legitimate country.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, there are plenty of things and issues related to the Israel we can discuss, but because of the time limitation and we have to focus on the Palestine issue, we just consider this part of the issues that we want to talk about this to you. Thank you very much, Michael, and God bless you.
You're quite welcome. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience. That's very kind of you.
Thank you very much. I do really appreciate for joining us. Goodbye.
Okay, Khudafis.
Khudafis. Dear audience, it was another talk with Michael Springmann on the deal of century and the annexation of the West Bank to Israel. Thanks for watching and catch you later.